Listen up, beautiful nerds. Imagine being sick. You got a fever. You feel weak. You can barely stand up. So you go to the doctor. And they decide that the best way to treat you is to cut you open and drain your blood. Dun 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 dun. Not carefully, not gently, just bleed you. And somehow this became one of the most trusted treatments in history. And if that sounds insane, my friends, trust me, it gets worse. See, bloodletting wasn't rare. It wasn't experimental. It was one of the most common medical treatments in history, used across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia for stuff like fevers, infections, headaches, pain, and even mental illness. If something was wrong with your body, there was a good chance that blood would be removed. But to understand why, you have to understand how people thought of the human body. Because for over 2,000 years, medicine was based on something called humoral theory. The system dates back to ancient Greece around the 5th century BCE, and I'm actually going to do a little deep dive on this because the system gets a lot weirder than it sounds. The idea was that the human body was basically made up of 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And if these fluids were in balance, they were balanced, then you had health. If they were imbalanced, so not balanced, then it would cause illness in the body. So every symptom was basically interpreted through these lenses. And Hippocrates, a Greek physician from around 400 BCE, believed that an excess or deficiency of any of these fluids would cause a disease. So later in the 2nd century, Galen, a Roman physician, expanded on these ideas. And his work would shape medicine for 1,000 years. Each of these fluids had its own qualities. Blood was considered, for example, hot and wet. Yellow bile was hot and dry. Black bile was cold and dry. And phlegm was cold and wet. And again, these weren't just random ideas. These were connected to nature itself. Spring was linked to blood. Summer was linked to yellow bile, fall was linked to black bile, and winter was linked to phlegm. The body wasn't seen as separate from the world around it. It was actually part of it. So if something went wrong, like a fever, pain, fatigue, even changes in the mood, the assumption was very simple. Basically, something inside you was out of place, and the solution was to restore that balance, often by removing something. And in many cases, that meant removing blood. Now, you have to understand that for centuries, these ideas basically dominated medical thinking across Europe and beyond, from ancient Greece to the Roman Empire and into the Middle Ages. This wasn't just one theory. This was the foundation of medicine. They opened veins. They cut into the skin. They allowed blood to just leave the body in hope that it would restore balance. And again, this wasn't random. Typical treatments were based directly on the humoral theory. So basically, if a certain fluid was believed to be excess, it had to be removed so it could be restored, right? And there were different methods that were developed, and sometimes, most of the times, it was a single cut done by a physician, or in many cases a barber surgeon. We'll get back to that. And they would open the vein using a small blade, allowing blood to just flow into a bowl. Sometimes they measured it, sometimes they didn't. But other methods were more mechanical and maybe a little more savage, because there was a device known as a scarifier. And it was a small instrument designed to make multiple cuts into the skin at once. Instead of focusing on one incision, like, yeah, let's bleed you more, faster, it used several tiny blades released at the same time. Fast, controlled, efficient, my friends. And after that, Then you had other methods that started being used. There was a heated glass cup placed over the skin, creating suction, and that's basically pulling blood to the surface. And this is known as cupping. Some of you may actually do cupping now. And when combined with the cutting, it was known as wet cupping. So yes, forms of cupping are still practiced today. I know people who do it. So sometimes the tools, however, weren't always blades or these crazy machines. Sometimes they used leeches who were placed directly on the body and allowed to attach and slowly drain blood over time. Surprisingly, leeches are still being used in modern medicine today, especially in certain surgical procedures to help restore blood flow. I feel like I personally would rather the leeches because it's more like slow than just like so dramatic. Okay, so again, there were, there's different techniques and different methods, but they all had the same goal, and it was basically to remove blood and restore balance. It wasn't limited to one type of person. It wasn't just everyday people. You also had royalty do it. And even during moments as serious as childbirths, they were using bloodletting. In 1685, King Charles II of England was bled after suffering a seizure from his arm and from his neck. They were even bleeding people from their necks at times. Yeah, treatments like bloodletting were commonly used for fainting and complications, also during childbirth. And even among the highest levels of society in medieval Europe, people were regularly visiting the barber surgeons, which we're going to talk about. And it wasn't because they were sick, but to bleed on purpose for prevention. So, and it's so crazy because in other parts of the world, they were doing it for different reasons. So bloodletting took an entirely different meaning. There was like in some parts where there were priests and rulers performing bloodletting on themselves, and it wasn't even to treat illness, but it was more as a ritual to enter like an entrance like state and communicate with the spiritual world. Hey, that actually I should do a deep dive on that. Different reasons, different beliefs, and same act. It was basically blood being removed from the body. Now this is where it gets really insane, because who was performing these procedures? It was not always the physicians. In early modern Europe, especially between the 1500s and 1700s, barber surgeons played a major role in everyday medical care. And I'm 1000% doing a deep dive on this one, because this deserves its own episode for real. The same person who cut your hair might also be the one opening your vein to bleed you out. And this is where it gets really weird, because back in the day, surgeons were actually at the bottom of the medical hierarchy because it was considered manual labor, which honestly feels insane if you think about it, because today they're like one of the most respected in the hospital. They're all the way at the top, right? But at the time, at the top were the physicians, the thinkers, the university educated, my friends, and they would basically diagnose illnesses, but often they wouldn't treat you. They wouldn't touch you. Ew. Ew. Let me stop. So you could, they would literally like examine you and tell you what was wrong, but they never touched you. Meanwhile, the actual like cutting and bloodletting and physical procedures were done by surgeons, but in many cases, my friends, by barbers. Yes, like in the barber shop. I am not joking, because surgery was considered, again, manual labor. So yeah, the people cutting into your body were not always the highest trained medical authorities, which is actually insane to think about. And it does sound insane, but this was completely normal at the time. Medicine wasn't the same as it is today. And if you really think about it, you can go in and get a haircut and leave with less blood than what you came in with. So yeah, don't cheat on your barber, guys. And And for centuries, this made sense. By the 1600s, though, this understanding began to change because in 1628, William Harvey demonstrated how blood circulates in the body. And by the 1700s and 1800s, some doctors started questioning the old ideas, not just in terms of balance, but also like movement, flow, circulation. And even as new ideas emerged, though, bloodletting didn't just disappear like that. It continued well into the 1800s. Even as medicine slowly began to change, blood was still being removed again and again and again. But before I let you go, my friends, in December of 1799, George Washington became seriously ill. He had a fever, he had a severe sore throat, and he had difficulty breathing. Doctors were called, bleeders were called, and they did what medicine had taught them for centuries. They bled him, not once, not twice, not even 3 times, multiple times over the course of just hours. And by the end, it's estimated that around 40% of his blood volume had been removed. And shortly after, he died. So at the time, this was considered appropriate treatment. He asked for this treatment himself. But looking back now, did the illness kill him or did the treatment kill him? I am 1000% also doing a deep dive on this. I'm giving you all the deep dives I can because you guys need to know about George Washington's death. It's very interesting. So my friends, for centuries, bloodletting made sense. Honestly, it followed logic. It followed belief. It followed everything that people thought they understood about the human body, honestly. But history has a very weird way of showing us something uncomfortable. Sometimes the things that we trust the most can cause the most harm. Thank you for watching, my friends. Stay safe, stay weird, stay curious. This is Glory from Archives of the Centuries. I'll see you in the archives, my historian friends.